The rain had that particular November quality, cold enough to seep through 3 layers of clothing but not quite cold enough to turn to snow. Ray Castellano hunched deeper into his salvaged overcoat, the one with the broken zipper and the oil stain that never quite washed out, and picked his way through the alley behind the old electronics district. His shopping cart, which he'd liberated from an abandoned grocery store 2 years back, rattled over broken asphalt with a rhythmic squeak he'd long stopped hearing. The city had a way of forgetting its corners, and Ray had become an expert in forgotten things. Copper wire, mostly. Sometimes aluminum if he got lucky. The recycling center gave him enough for a hot meal and maybe a coffee that didn't taste like cigarette ashes. He'd worked at Vanguard Aerospace once, back when people still fixed things instead of letting machines do it. That was before the facility closed, before the divorce, before the apartment became too expensive and then the car and then the motel room and then finally even the weekly rental was a luxury he couldn't afford. He'd stopped being bitter about it around month 6 of sleeping under the Interstate 40 overpass. Bitterness took energy he needed for other things, like not freezing to death. The dumpster behind Chen's electronics repair looked promising. Old Chen had finally retired last month, and the building stood empty, its windows dark and accumulating grime. Ray approached with the practiced caution of someone who'd once discovered a family of raccoons defending their territory with surprising tactical coordination. The memory still made him check his rabies vaccination timeline, not that he could afford a booster anyway. That's when he saw her. She was crumpled against the brick wall like someone had dropped her from a great height, though there was nothing above except a rusty fire escape that didn't look like it could support a determined cat, let alone a person. Rain plastered dark hair against her face, and even in the dim light from the street, Ray could see blood, a lot of it, matting the hair above her left temple. "Hey," Ray called out, his voice rusty from disuse. He mostly talked to himself these days, and himself rarely answered back. "You all right?" Stupid question. She obviously wasn't all right. Ray abandoned his cart and moved closer, his maintenance technician training kicking in like muscle memory. Check for breathing first. He knelt in a puddle that immediately soaked through his jeans and pressed 2 fingers against her neck. Pulse, thready but there. Breathing shallow. Okay, we're not dying tonight," Ray muttered, pulling off his outer flannel shirt. He'd worn 2, a trick he'd learned his first winter on the streets. The cleaner one, relatively speaking, got pressed against the head wound. Blood soaked through immediately, warm and disturbingly red. "Though I gotta say, your timing could use some work. I'm not exactly equipped for emergency medicine here." She was young, maybe mid-20s, and dressed in clothing that made Ray's brain stutter trying to process it. The material looked like leather but moved like silk, seamless in a way that suggested it had been grown rather than sewn. No visible zippers, buttons, or seams except at the shoulders. It shimmered faintly under the streetlight, colors shifting between deep blue and black in a way that fabric shouldn't. Ray had seen a lot of strange things in the city, people wore all kinds of experimental fashion downtown, but this was different. This was expensive strange, the kind of strange that came with grants and research labs. "Where'd you get this jacket?" Ray asked, knowing she couldn't hear him but needing to fill the silence. "Because I'm thinking it's either cutting-edge materials science or you robbed a very specialized costume shop. I'm hoping for the former because I'm not great with moral ambiguity before breakfast." He shifted her carefully, trying to assess other injuries, and that's when he saw them. Her ears, partially hidden by her hair, came to delicate points that extended almost 2 inches beyond what human anatomy should allow. The shape was elegant, almost artistic, tapering to tips that caught the light. Ray sat back on his heels, frowning. Prosthetics maybe? He'd heard about body modification enthusiasts who did extreme procedures. But these looked integrated, natural, complete with the tiny variations and asymmetries that marked biological growth rather than surgical enhancement. "Okay, so you're either a really committed cosplayer who had a bad night," Ray said, maintaining pressure on the wound, "or I'm about to have the weirdest Tuesday of my month, and let me tell you, last Tuesday I watched a man argue with a parking meter for 45 minutes, so the bar's pretty high. The rational thing would be to call 911. The rational thing would be to flag down one of the police cruisers that occasionally swept through. But Ray had learned that rationality was a luxury that came with having a permanent address and a bank account. Emergency rooms asked questions, demanded insurance information, called social services. They'd take her, sure, but they'd also take his name, run it through systems, maybe decide a homeless man with a bleeding woman deserved some extra scrutiny. Besides, she'd been dumped here, in an alley, bleeding. Someone had left her. Maybe someone who'd hurt her. Maybe someone who'd come back. Ray made a decision that would have horrified his younger self, the one who'd followed rules and filed taxes and believed the system worked. He carefully lifted her, lighter than he expected, bird-boned despite appearing fully grown, and carried her toward his camp under the overpass. His cart followed behind, squeaking its disapproval. "I've got some canned soup," Ray told his unconscious passenger, navigating by muscle memory through familiar streets. It's chicken noodle, which is the most optimistic flavor of soup because it implies the existence of chicken and noodles despite all evidence to the contrary. I've also got a blanket that's only mostly clean and a concrete floor with excellent acoustics for listening to traffic. 5 stars on Yelp, 0 actual stars from any health inspector. She didn't respond, but her breathing seemed to steady slightly. Ray told himself that was a good sign and tried not to think about all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. Dawn arrived with the subtlety of a freight train, which was appropriate since Ray's camp sat exactly 47 feet from active rail lines. The woman, he really needed to start thinking of her as something other than the bleeding stranger, had slept through the night without further incident, unless he counted the moment around 3 a.m. when she'd mumbled something that sounded like recalibrate the phase variance, before rolling over. Ray had not slept. Sleeping required a certain level of confidence that you wouldn't wake up to find your guest either dead or homicidal, and Ray's confidence reserves had been running on empty since approximately 2019. She stirred as pink light filtered through the gaps in the overpass structure, her eyes opening slowly like someone rebooting an old computer. They were violet. Not purple-tinged blue or trick of the light violet, but actual deep violet, the color of those flowers Ray could never remember the name of, the ones his ex-wife had planted in the garden of the house they'd lost. "Oh good, you're alive," Ray said from his position near the shopping cart, where he'd been organizing his collection of circuit boards by level of corrosion. "I was starting to worry I'd have to figure out the ethics of what to do with a body, and my philosophy degree from the University of Hard Knocks didn't really cover that module." She blinked at him, processing. Her hand moved to her head, finding the makeshift bandage he'd fashioned from his shirt and the mostly clean duct tape. "You helped me," she said. Her voice had a quality that reminded Ray of wind chimes, musical in a way that suggested English might not be her first language, though her accent didn't match anything he recognized. "Seemed like the thing to do," Ray said. "You were bleeding on prime real estate, that's my scavenging alley, and the blood was really bringing down the property values." She sat up slowly, testing her limbs like someone making sure all the parts still connected properly. Ray noticed she moved with unusual precision, each gesture economical and purposeful in a way that suggested either dance training or military discipline. "I'm Lyra," she said, looking at him with those impossible eyes. "And you are?" "Ray Castellano, current resident of this luxury accommodation featuring open-air ventilation and a stunning view of the underside of municipal infrastructure." He gestured broadly at their surroundings. "The breakfast menu is limited, but I can offer you canned peaches or canned soup, both of which are technically food according to the labels." Lyra smiled, and something about it seemed slightly off, like she was remembering how smiling worked rather than doing it naturally. "I would appreciate anything you can share." Ray retrieved his camping stove, a small propane affair he'd bought back when he still had a job, and began heating water for instant coffee. He had exactly 2 packets left, but caffeine withdrawal was not how he wanted to start this particular conversation. "So," Ray said, watching the water heat, I'm going to skip past the obvious questions about how you ended up unconscious in an alley and jump straight to the part where you tell me why your ears look like you're auditioning for a fantasy movie and your eyes are a color that doesn't naturally occur in human beings. Lyra touched one of her ears self-consciously. I should have hidden them better. The projection field must have failed when I crashed. The what field? Projection. It creates a visual overlay that makes me appear more. She searched for the word, standard. Ray stopped pouring water over coffee grounds. I'm going to need you to back up several steps in that explanation, because it sounds like you just described a hologram, and unless technology made some significant leaps while I've been busy being homeless, we're not quite there yet. Lyra reached into a pocket of her strange jacket and pulled out something that looked like a smooth river stone, except it pulsed with soft internal light. She pressed it, and suddenly her ears appeared shorter, rounded at the tips. Her eyes shifted to a mundane brown. It lasted maybe 3 seconds before flickering and dying. Damaged, she said simply. Along with everything else when my survey pod malfunctioned. Ray sat down hard on his sleeping bag, which was really just 3 blankets he'd layered together. Survey pod. Yes. As in spacecraft. Yes. As in you're an alien. Lyra tilted her head, considering. That term seems unnecessarily othering. I'm a person from somewhere else. You're a person from here. The differences are primarily geographic. Ray laughed, a sound that came out slightly hysterical. Geographic. Right. Just different neighborhoods. You're from the Andromeda subdivision, I'm from the Earth cul-de-sac. Actually, I'm from a system you don't have a name for yet. It's about 47 light-years from here, though distance becomes complicated when you account for. She stopped, noticing Ray's expression. You're making a joke. Humor as a stress response. I've read about this. You've read about humor? We study human behavior extensively. You're very interesting. She accepted the cup of coffee Ray handed her with both hands, inhaling deeply. This smells like burned plant matter mixed with optimism. That's the most accurate description of instant coffee I've ever heard. Ray sipped his own cup, letting the terrible warmth spread through him. Okay, I'll bite. Why is an alien doing surveillance on Earth, and more importantly, why did you crash in my alley? The first question has a complicated answer involving interstellar observation protocols and cultural development monitoring. The second question has a simple answer. Equipment failure combined with atmospheric electromagnetic interference that your species generates in remarkable quantities. We're noisy. I'll accept that. Ray pulled out his last can of peaches, the expensive kind with real fruit visible through the can's window. He'd been saving it for something special, and apparently, discovering aliens are real, qualified. What I'm struggling with is why the friendly neighborhood homeless guy gets to be the one who finds out aliens exist. Shouldn't you have crashed into a government facility or a university or someone's cornfield in the Midwest? Probability doesn't care about narrative convenience, Lyra said, accepting half the peaches. She examined them with intense curiosity before tasting one. Her eyes widened. These are extraordinary. They're 79 cents at the dollar store. Then your economics make no sense. She ate another peach with obvious delight. This is better than most processed nutrition I've encountered across 6 systems. Ray found himself smiling despite the absurdity. Here he was, sharing bottom-shelf canned fruit with an alien under a highway overpass, and somehow it felt more real than anything had in months. So what happens now? Ray asked. Do your people come looking for you? Do I need to worry about men in black showing up? Lyra's expression turned serious. Both, actually. My people will search, but quietly. But your government agencies also detected the crash. They'll be searching too, and they're significantly less subtle. She looked at Ray with sudden intensity. You should know that helping me has complicated your life considerably. They'll want to question anyone associated with the crash site. My life was already complicated, Ray said. I'm homeless, remember? Adding, harboring fugitive aliens to my resume is honestly a lateral move. But even as he joked, Ray felt the weight of it settling over him. Whatever safety came from invisibility, from being just another ignored person in the city's margins, he'd just traded it for something far more dangerous. And somehow, looking at Lyra's grateful smile as she finished the last of the peaches, he couldn't quite bring himself to regret it. Ray had just finished explaining the concept of hot dogs when the lights appeared. Not car headlights or police helicopters, but something that moved across the night sky with geometric precision, silent as a held breath. The craft, and it was definitely a craft, not a plane or drone, cut through the darkness in sharp angles, making turns that should have torn apart anything with mass and momentum. Tell me that's yours, Ray said, watching three separate objects converge above the city center. Lyra stood so quickly she knocked over Ray's carefully organized pile of salvaged transistors. Her violet eyes tracked the lights with obvious concern. No. Mine was barely functional before it failed completely. Those are search patterns. Multiple vessels running coordinated scans. Your people. Possibly. Or yours. She turned to him, and for the first time since waking, she looked genuinely frightened. Ray, I need to explain something about first contact protocols. When a civilization reaches a certain technological threshold, they get monitored more closely. Earth crossed that threshold about 70 years ago. Let me guess, atomic weapons. Among other things. Nuclear fission, space exploration, global communication networks, artificial intelligence precursors. You're right at the edge of either destroying yourselves or becoming something greater, and everyone wants to know which way you'll jump. Ray sat back against the concrete support pillar, processing this. So what, the galaxy runs a betting pool on whether we'll blow ourselves up. More like they're trying to decide if you're ready to know you're not alone. Lyra began gathering her things, which consisted mostly of the damaged devices she'd been carrying. My mission was observational. Document human behavior, particularly acts of altruism and cooperation. Compile evidence that could support a case for open contact. How's that going? She looked at him with something that might have been affection. You shared your last meal with a stranger who could have been dangerous. You gave up your shelter and medical supplies for someone you'd never met. Your species fascinates us because you're capable of such remarkable kindness despite living in conditions that would justify pure self-interest. Yeah, well, don't go writing any papers about humanity's greatness yet. For every person like me, there's 10 who'd step over you bleeding in the street. Ray pulled out his ancient smartphone, the screen cracked but functional, and checked the local news feeds. Speaking of which, we've got a problem. He turned the screen toward Lyra. The headline read, Unidentified object crashes near downtown, authorities investigating. Below it, shaky phone camera footage showed the alley behind Chen's Electronics, now cordoned off with yellow tape and crawling with people in dark suits carrying equipment that looked expensive and ominous. That was fast, Ray muttered. Your government has been preparing for extraterrestrial contact since the 1940s. They have entire departments dedicated to detection and containment. Lyra pressed something on one of her devices, and it projected a three-dimensional map into the air between them, showing the city in ghostly blue lines. Red dots marked positions throughout downtown. These are scanning stations. They're running spectral analysis, looking for biological markers that don't match terrestrial life. Ray stared at the hologram, his brain trying to reconcile advanced technology with his current reality of living under a bridge. Can they find you? Eventually. My biology is different enough that sustained scanning will identify anomalies. I have maybe 12 hours before they narrow the search radius to this area. Fantastic. So we've got government agents looking for you, your people looking for you, and I'm guessing neither group is going to be thrilled to find you camping with the local homeless population. Actually, that's the safest thing for you, Lyra said. She manipulated the hologram, and the red dots shifted, revealing gaps in the coverage. They're scanning registered addresses, licensed vehicles, secured buildings. They assume any crashed pilot would seek shelter in documented spaces. They're not looking at the margins. The invisible people. Exactly. You've survived by staying outside their systems. That makes you the last person they'd suspect of harboring me. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Though it also means you're the last person who should be doing this. You have no safety net if this goes wrong. Ray laughed, the sound echoing off concrete. Lyra, my safety net dissolved about 3 years ago. At this point, I'm in free fall anyway. Might as well fall with purpose. A vehicle approached on the access road above them, its engine running too smooth to be civilian. Ray killed his camping light, and they pressed against the support pillar, hidden in shadows. The car passed slowly, spotlight sweeping across the underside of the overpass. Ray could make out 2 figures inside, both wearing the kind of tactical gear that suggested they weren't regular police. They're expanding the search, Lyra whispered. Looking for vagrant populations who might have witnessed the crash. Vagrant. That's a fancy word for people society pretends don't exist until they need something. Ray waited until the car disappeared around the bend before relaxing slightly. How long until your people can extract you? They'll be cautious. Earth isn't part of the cooperative yet, so direct intervention requires approval from multiple councils. Could be days. Days of hiding from 2 different groups with technology way beyond my pay grade, which is currently $0 per hour. Ray ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of the situation. You know what the funny part is? Yesterday my biggest concern was whether I'd find enough copper wire to buy dinner. Now I'm in the middle of an interstellar incident. That's what we call upward mobility. Lyra touched his arm, and Ray noticed her fingers were warmer than human baseline, like holding hands with someone running a mild fever. I can leave. Find somewhere else to hide. You've already done more than anyone could expect. And go where? Every shelter in the city has security cameras now. Every public space has facial recognition. The only places left that the system doesn't watch are places like this, and you don't know how to navigate them. Ray stood, making a decision. Plus, I'm curious. You said you're documenting human altruism. Well, here's your chance to see it in action. We're going to get you somewhere safe, figure out how to contact your people, and try not to get disappeared by men in black suits. The men in black are actually mostly women in navy blue suits, according to our research. Even better. Diversity in shadowy government organizations. We're making progress as a species. Ray began packing his essential supplies, the camping stove, his tool kit, the plastic bin containing his collection of old tech magazines. I know a place. Old subway tunnels they sealed off when they built the new line. There's a whole network down there that hasn't seen official eyes in decades. How do you know about it? Because when you're invisible to society, you learn where all the blind spots are. It's like a whole other city down there, populated by people who fell through the cracks. Ray shouldered his backpack, feeling the familiar weight. The entrance to the old subway system looked like every other piece of urban decay, a rusted grate half hidden behind a dumpster that probably hadn't been emptied since the previous administration. Ray had discovered it during his 2nd month on the streets, back when he still thought homelessness would be temporary, just a rough patch before things improved. 3 years later, he'd learned that temporary was a fairy tale people told themselves to sleep better. Watch your step, Ray said, prying the grate open with a crowbar he kept strapped to his cart. The first ladder rung is mostly rust and wishful thinking. Lyra peered into the darkness below, her violet eyes seeming to gather what little light existed. Your infrastructure maintenance is remarkably poor. Yeah, well, fixing things costs money, and money gets allocated to things voters can see. Nobody votes for better sewers. Ray descended first, testing each rung carefully. His cart stayed topside, there was no way to bring it down without making enough noise to wake half the district. He'd hidden it behind the dumpster, camouflaged with trash bags. Not perfect, but in this neighborhood, a shopping cart full of junk was basically invisible anyway. The tunnel at the bottom smelled like standing water and decades of neglect, but it was dry enough and, more importantly, far from any active surveillance. Ray clicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through absolute darkness to reveal tile walls covered in graffiti from at least 3 different decades. Someone had spray-painted, "The system failed US," in red letters big enough to read from 20 feet away. Subtle, Lyra said, reading the message. Street art tends toward the direct. We're not big on metaphor when we're angry. Ray led her deeper into the tunnel system, navigating by memory and the occasional landmark. There's a junction about 200 meters ahead where 5 different tunnels meet. Some people camp there sometimes, but most avoid it because it floods during heavy rain. It's not raining now. Yeah, but paranoia keeps you alive down here. People who think too much about comfort are people who get surprised when the storm drains overflow and turn your bedroom into a swimming pool. They walked in silence for a while, their footsteps echoing off tile and concrete. Somewhere in the distance, water dripped with metronomic precision. Ray found the rhythm oddly soothing, proof that some things maintain patterns even when everything else fell apart. "Can I ask you something?" Ray said finally, his voice bouncing weirdly in the enclosed space. "If your people have been watching us for decades, why not just make contact? Rip off the bandage, tell everyone aliens exist, save us all a lot of conspiracy theories and bad science fiction." "Because contact changes everything," Lyra said. She had one of her devices out, a small disc that glowed softly and probably did something incredibly advanced that Ray's maintenance technician brain couldn't begin to parse. When a civilization learns it's not alone, it forces immediate philosophical and social restructuring. Some species handle it well. Others fracture. And you think we're the fracturing type? Your planet can't agree on basic resource distribution or whether objective reality exists. Introducing the concept of hundreds of other civilizations, some millions of years more advanced, would either unite you or shatter you into competing factions trying to gain advantage through alien alliance. She glanced at him. "We prefer to wait until you're stable enough internally to handle external contact. So basically we're children who can't be trusted with adult information. More like adolescents who are almost ready but still prone to catastrophic decision-making when stressed." Lyra smiled. "Though observing humans has convinced many of us that you're closer than the conservative factions believe. Acts like yours, helping a stranger at personal cost, suggest a capacity for cooperation that transcends survival instinct." Ray thought about that as they reached the junction. 5 tunnels spread out like spokes on a wheel, each leading to different parts of the underground network. Someone had set up a camp in one corner, but it looked abandoned. Just some cardboard boxes and empty bottles arranged around a circle of ash where fires had been burned. "Home sweet home," Ray said, setting down his backpack. "It's not much, but the rent is free and the neighbors are quiet, mostly because there aren't any." Lyra immediately began working on her devices, laying them out with the care of a surgeon arranging instruments. One of them projected that holographic map again, but this time it included the tunnel system they were in, rendered in green lines beneath the city's red mark surveillance grid. "We're completely off their sensors here," she confirmed. "Too much interference from old wiring and water pipes. They'd need to send people down physically, and that takes time to organize." "How much time?" "Enough. My people received my distress signal. They're positioning a recovery vessel, but it has to avoid your orbital detection systems, which means waiting for a specific window." She manipulated the hologram, and suddenly Ray was looking at Earth from space, surrounded by satellites and debris. "You've cluttered your orbit remarkably thoroughly for a species that's barely left your own planet. We're enthusiastic litterers. It's part of our charm." Ray sat on one of the more structurally sound cardboard boxes, watching Lyra work. "So what happens when they pick you up? Do I get a memory wipe? A stern warning not to tell anyone? A pamphlet about intergalactic relations? You get a choice." Ray blinked. Come again. Lyra stopped working and looked at him directly, her alien eyes unreadable in the strange light of her technology. Ray, you helped me without knowing what I was. You shared resources you desperately needed. You put yourself at risk for someone who could offer you nothing in return. That kind of action is exactly what we look for when evaluating species for contact. I'm not a species. I'm one guy who made one decision. One decision that I recorded. Every interaction we've had, my biomonitor has been documenting. She touched a device at her throat that Ray had assumed was jewelry. This data will be reviewed by the Council. Your altruism, captured in complete detail, becomes evidence that humans are capable of cooperation beyond tribal boundaries. Ray felt something cold settle in his stomach. So I'm what, an exhibit? Proof of concept. You're proof that humanity deserves a chance. Lyra's expression softened. But more than that, you've earned recognition. When my people extract me, they'll offer you the option to come. Not as a specimen or curiosity, but as someone who represents the best of what your species can be. Come where? To our vessel. To meet the recovery team and, eventually, to potentially serve as one of the first human liaisons when contact is eventually made public. She paused. You'd be educated, trained, given purpose and resources. You'd help guide how humanity learns about the broader universe. Ray laughed, the sound sharp and slightly bitter in the tunnel's acoustics. Lady, I can't even guide myself to a steady paycheck. You want me to help guide humanity's first contact with aliens? I'm homeless. I'm nobody. I'm the guy society decided wasn't worth keeping around. That's exactly why you're perfect, Lyra said. You have no investment in the current power structures. You're not beholden to governments or corporations. You helped me because it was right, not because you calculated advantage. That's the perspective we need, someone who understands that worth isn't measured by economic productivity. Ray sat there in the dark, in an abandoned subway tunnel beneath a city that had forgotten him, while an alien offered him a future he couldn't have imagined 24 hours ago. It felt like a joke, like the universe's way of laughing at the cosmic absurdity of his life. You know the really funny part? Ray said finally. I've spent 3 years invisible. 3 years of people looking through me like I'm made of glass. And now you're telling me that being invisible, being outside the system, makes me valuable. Not just valuable. Essential. Lyra's device chimed softly, and she checked it with obvious concern. The recovery window opens in 6 hours. You don't have to decide now, but Ray, she met his eyes. Whatever you choose, you've already changed things. The data I've collected will affect policy decisions that impact billions. You saved more than just my life. Above them, through layers of concrete and earth, the city hummed with morning traffic, unaware that beneath its streets, a homeless man was being offered the stars. Ray spent 4 of those 6 hours mentally listing all the reasons this was insane. The list got to 47 before he stopped counting and just accepted that insanity was apparently his new baseline. Somewhere around item 32, you don't even have a valid passport, he'd started laughing, and Lyra had looked at him with concern until he explained that interstellar travel probably didn't require TSA approval. Though knowing bureaucracy, Ray had said, there's probably some cosmic customs form I'll need to fill out in triplicate. Now, crouched in the tunnel with Lyra's devices casting strange shadows on graffitied walls, Ray watched her coordinate with her people through technology that made his salvaged smartphones look like stone tools. The recovery plan was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its execution. They'd surface in the industrial district at dawn, where a vessel would descend for exactly 90 seconds, long enough to extract Lyra and anyone with her, short enough to avoid sustained detection. Your government will know something happened, Lyra explained, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. But by the time they mobilize a response, we'll be beyond their atmosphere. They'll have questions but no answers, which is historically how these situations resolve. You've done this before. 17 times in the last century. Crashed observers, equipment failures, occasionally someone who just wanted to see Earth up close and miscalculated atmospheric entry. Your skies are more crowded than you realize. Ray shouldered his backpack, which contained everything he owned that mattered, some photos from before, his maintenance certification even though it had expired, his collection of tech magazines that he'd read so many times the pages were falling out. Pathetic, really, that 3 years of life fit in one bag. But also liberating. Nothing tying him here except gravity and habit. I need to tell you something, Ray said as Lyra packed her equipment. I'm terrified. Like, existentially, cosmically terrified. I've been scared before, scared of freezing, scared of starving, scared of just disappearing completely and nobody noticing. But this is different. This is choosing to disappear on purpose. You can still refuse. Stay here. I'll erase any record of our interaction from my systems. You return to your life, and this becomes a strange story you tell yourself sometimes, wondering if it was real. Ray thought about the overpass, his shopping cart, the daily routine of scavenging and surviving. He thought about the faces that looked through him, the system that had decided he wasn't worth saving. He thought about the cold and the hunger and the grinding certainty that this was all there would ever be until he died in some alley and became a statistic in a police report. Here's the thing about having nothing, Ray said. It means you've got nothing to lose. And yeah, maybe that should make me careful, make me cling to the little I have. But instead it makes me think, what the hell, right? What's the worst that happens? I die in space instead of under a bridge. At least it's a better view. That's remarkably philosophical for someone who claims to have no education. I've got a doctorate from the School of Hard Knocks. We're very big on existentialism. Ray zipped up his jacket, the same one with the broken zipper and oil stain. Plus, you said something that stuck with me. About how I represent humanity's potential. And I keep thinking, if someone like me, someone the system threw away, can represent anything good about our species, then maybe we're not as hopeless as I thought. They left the tunnel as the sky shifted from black to gray, that pre-dawn moment when the city held its breath before the day's chaos began. The industrial district sprawled before them, all chain-link fences and loading docks and buildings that looked abandoned until you noticed the security cameras. Lyra led them to a lot filled with shipping containers, the kind stacked like building blocks by cranes that sat silent and dormant. Here, Lyra said, checking her device. 30 seconds. Ray's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. The moment where his life forked into two impossible paths, stay and remain invisible, or go and become something he couldn't even imagine. The sky rippled. That was the only way Ray could describe it. The air itself seemed to fold, and suddenly there was a vessel descending with impossible silence, its surface reflecting the environment so perfectly it was nearly invisible. Only the slight distortion, like heat waves off summer asphalt, gave away its position. A section of the vessel opened, revealing light that was somehow both bright and gentle, not the harsh glare of searchlights but something organic. Two figures appeared in the opening, tall, elegant, with those same distinctive ears that marked them as Lyra's people. One of them gestured urgently. We need to move, Lyra said, grabbing Ray's hand. Her grip was warm and solid and real, proof that this wasn't some elaborate breakdown his homeless brain had conjured from malnutrition and desperation. They ran across the lot, Ray's backpack bouncing against his spine. Behind them, he heard sirens. Someone had detected the vessel, which meant they had seconds, not minutes. The universe's timing remained impeccable and terrible. Ray's feet hit the ramp, and suddenly he was inside something that shouldn't exist, surrounded by surfaces that glowed with embedded light and technology that made his salvaged circuit boards look like children's toys. The two figures pulled them in with practiced efficiency, and the opening sealed with a sound like a sigh. Ray Castellano, one of them said, and his name had never sounded quite like that before, pronounced with careful precision by someone reading it for the first time. Welcome aboard. I'm Saris, recovery coordinator for this sector. Hi, Ray managed, because what else do you say when meeting your second and third aliens? Nice ship. Very clean. Do you guys have a good vacuum, or is there some anti-gravity dust repellent? Saris smiled, and Ray realized his nervous humor translated across species. We like you, she said to Lyra. Your assessment was accurate. The vessel lifted, and Ray felt nothing, no G-forces, no acceleration, nothing except the slight disorientation of knowing he was moving when his body insisted he was standing still. A screen materialized on the wall, showing Earth falling away with stomach-dropping speed. Ray watched his planet shrink to a blue marble, then a dot, then just another light among countless lights. I didn't think it would be this fast, Ray whispered. We're efficient, Saris said. Your government is already scrambling interceptors, but they're designed for atmospheric combat. We'll be beyond their operational range before they finish their launch sequence. Lyra stood beside Ray, watching the screen. How are you feeling? Like I should be more scared than I am. Like this should feel more unreal. Ray touched the wall, feeling smooth material that was neither metal nor plastic but something else entirely. Mostly I'm thinking about a hot dog vendor I know, guy named Marcus who works the corner by the library. He always gave me extra sauerkraut, never charged me full price. And I didn't get to tell him goodbye or thank you or explain why I just vanished. That's what you're thinking about? Hot dogs? Kindness, Ray corrected. I'm thinking about the small kindnesses that kept me alive when the system said I should die. Marcus and his sauerkraut. The librarian who let me charge my phone even though I wasn't checking out books. The woman at the shelter who always saved me the meatloaf because she knew it was my favorite. Those people made me worth saving, just like I tried to make you worth saving. Saris approached, carrying something that looked like a data tablet but thinner and somehow more present, as if it existed slightly more than normal objects. Ray, Lyra has explained your situation. Before we proceed further, I need to inform you of what comes next. You'll be educated, trained in interspecies diplomacy and cultural liaison work. When Earth is ready for formal contact, and the data Lyra collected suggests that maybe sooner than projected, you'll be one of the primary human representatives. Me. The guy who lived under a bridge. The guy who shared his last meal with a stranger, Saris corrected. The guy who risked everything for someone he'd just met. Those qualities are rare enough in any species, valuable enough in all of them. You'll speak for humanity not because you're powerful or wealthy, but because you're good. Ray laughed, the sound slightly watery. You know what the funny part is? I spent 3 years thinking I was worthless. 3 years of society telling me I didn't matter, that I'd failed, that I was disposable. And it took an alien crash landing in my alley to show me that maybe the system was wrong, not me. Systems often are, Lyra said softly. That's why we watch for individuals who transcend them. Earth was gone now, just another star in an infinite field. Ray thought about the overpass, his shopping cart, the alley where he'd found Lyra bleeding and made the choice that changed everything. He thought about all the people still down there, invisible and ignored, grinding through days that felt like forever. He thought about Marcus and his sauerkraut, about small acts of rebellion against a world that demanded indifference. When contact happens, Ray said, turning to Saris, I want to make sure it's done right. I want people to understand that humanity isn't just our best and brightest, it's also the people society left behind. The invisible ones. The ones who kept being kind even when kindness gained them nothing. That's exactly the perspective we need, Saris agreed. Ray looked at his reflection in the screen, seeing himself against the backdrop of stars. Same worn jacket, same tired face, but something different in his eyes. Purpose, maybe. Or just the radical notion that his life had value after all. You know, Ray said, I should probably be more freaked out about leaving Earth forever, but honestly, I've been homeless for 3 years. I'm used to not having a home. At least now I'm homeless with benefits. Lyra laughed, that wind chime sound filling the vessel. Your species' capacity for humor in crisis situations is remarkable. Yeah, well, you gotta laugh. Otherwise you'd just cry, and crying doesn't change anything.